I'm Ken Canera, and you're listening to Beyond Consulting. Today, we welcome Dr. Kal Patel, CEO and co-founder of BrightInsight and former BCG consultant. But before we welcome Kal to the studio, I just want to remind our listeners that we are sponsored by ECA Partners, a project staffing and executive search firm focused on management consultants and private equity. Kal, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Ken.
You bet. So, Kal, you're in the Bay Area today, and that's because that's the location of your company, right? BrightInsight?
That's right. Yep, we were originated here in the Bay Area, though. Like many companies, we've sort of spread out in the virtual world that we live in now.
Excellent. And Kal, maybe just to start off, do you want to just give a quick kind of background in terms of how you ended up being both a doctor, a consultant, and a CEO and a co-founder?
Yeah, happy to give the short version here. I studied economics way back in college and was going to go straight to medical school. Ended up doing the med school admissions process, but then actually took a break and went to Boston Consulting Group and started my consulting career there as an associate in Chicago right out of college. I loved it so much, right? The learning curve, as your audience knows, the learning curve, the impact opportunities, the kind of colleagues you work with. So I actually decided to pivot. Instead of being a practicing physician, I focused on doing an MD MBA, so to really go deep in, part of the healthcare spectrum, but then go back to bringing that, to Boston Consulting Group and our clients. So did the MD MBA and then went back to BCG for about another 5 years, based in Chicago, as well as part of their ambassador program out in Eastern Europe. And then I went into industry. So I joined Novartis Pharma in different sales and marketing leadership roles, and then went to Amgen here in Southern California, was head of corporate strategy there, then global marketing lead for one of their main drugs, Enbrel. And then to get to your question, how to end up as a tech CEO, I founded and led what we call Amgen Digital Health. So one of the early kind of digital technology focused BUs or groups within big pharma. Right now, it's obviously a major theme in the industry, but this was about a decade ago. We were super early in thinking about and doing that. And that really opened up this whole world of digital and what can it do to improve the real world performance of pharmaceutical and medical device products. And that really pivoted my career then around that. Came to the Bay Area and joined a venture-backed telemedicine company called Doctor on Demand as they were doing their Series B. Was chief commercial officer there. And then about 5 years ago or so, with two of my co-founders from our Amgen digital health team, we started BrightInsight.
Excellent. And so first question right out of the gate, what is BrightInsight? What do y'all do?
BrightInsight, the problem we saw when we were at Amgen, really bringing digital into drugs, and just to give you an example or two of that would be things like, taking, let's say, today, not connected delivery devices and putting Bluetooth in them, right, connecting them to the cloud, so you get really personalized data on what's going on with the patient. And you can use that to then drive, things like personalized adherence reminders, as an example. We all forget at times to take our medicine, and that's a big pain point, both from a patient, from a clinical outcome, and ultimately from a business perspective for the pharmaco as well. So we were solving problems like that, or what are called software as medical device algorithms. So software that's regulated by the US, the FDA, because it's helping drive some aspect of a clinical decision, like a diagnosis, matching the right drug to the right patient, dosing, and so forth. So we started getting into those types of spaces to improve how our drugs work in the real world. And the innovation itself was super hard and super interesting. But what my co-founders and I learned is that to scale that, to bring that to the cloud, to modernize that software stack, and to really get scale in terms of number of markets, number of patients, use technology across different types of products, that was really hard. And everyone was trying to solve that problem bespoke, or most people didn't even know they were going to have this problem. And so we said, let's really build a company around enabling that, right? And that's what BrightInsight is. It's a fully regulated, meaning FDA and other countries' requirements, and we cover all the privacy and security side all out of the gates. So everything we do operates under those requirements, and our technology infrastructure then is on top of which pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies build things like I said, regulated software as medical devices, regulated patient apps, and solutions that might be physician-facing, connected drug delivery devices. If you now think about the medical device side, they're going through this Toyota Tesla transition, I kind of describe it as, right? Most medical devices today are not connected to the cloud, but the future, just like Tesla's, all cars will be. Same thing's happening there. So if you think, for example, in vitro diagnostic equipment, right? These are lab tests, let's say a blood test, et cetera. Okay. About 400 or 500 companies that do that in the world. they're all about to go through our early days of this journey of connecting their devices so that it can speak to the cloud, right? And it can talk about some of the benefits. Well, we're the infrastructure that can let them do that in a compliant way, fast speed to market, get global scalability, and have that compliance sort of box check so that they can be at ease that they're complying to all the requirements.
Okay, got it. And could you maybe give Cal, an example where, like at the patient level?
We'd love to. Let me take diabetes, right? Diabetes, most folks probably know somebody who has diabetes. It's unfortunately a very fast growing epidemic across the world. So when patients' diabetes sort of worsens to the point where they need insulin and you become an insulin dependent diabetic, in the United States, it takes nearly 3 years for you get to your right personal dose of what's called basal insulin, your long-acting insulin. In Europe, it takes over 2 years for a patient to get to the right dose. During that whole time, you're having organ damage because your glucose is going all over the place. And so your kidneys, your eyes, pretty much every organ in your body is being affected by non-optimal glucose control. The reason it takes that long has nothing to do with medicine. It actually has everything to do with how often you see your doctor. Because what the doctor wants to do is slowly tweak or titrate up your dose because they don't want to overshoot. Overshooting comes with its own risks, where if your glucose goes too low, you can faint, you can go into a coma. So they're going to titrate you up every visit. Mm-hmm. But then you have all that damage I just talked about. Well, software's medical device algorithm, with the right data input from a glucose monitor as an example and some other things, it can actually tell you how to adjust your dose so that you can get to your right personal dose in between those first 2 doctor visits instead of across 2 to 3 years, right? So you can literally get it down to 2 to 3 months. So if you think about the clinical benefit for that patient, you think about the benefit to the healthcare system, because you should ultimately drive, at scale to better clinical outcomes, right? Yeah. And what that means from a cost perspective and other diseases and illnesses you get from poorly controlled diabetes, massive, massive impact to be able to do that. And that's the kind of innovation that our customers are working on.
Oh, wow. And then I would also imagine that there is a benefit to call it larger populations by capturing that data and then centralizing it and all the learnings that you could have for other individual patient outcomes.
Absolutely, right? There's multiple ways to think about your comment, spot on. So the first is if you think about it at the individual patient level, mm-hmm. very little data about you from a clinical perspective is actually captured, right? For most people, it's the occasional once a year, a couple times a year, they might be in a doctor's office and you capture a little bit about your biometrics, what's your weight, what's your heart rate, your blood pressure happens to be at that moment, your respiratory rate, very limited. The other 99.99% of the time, no one's collecting any clinical data when you're actually out there in the real world about your health. So that's kind of one big transformation that's happening right now. Obviously folks are familiar with Apple Watch and other, Fitbits and things like that, but that's just sort of the early days of kind of bringing in clinical grade data about your personal biology and biometrics. The other thing you have is the second point you said, which is healthcare data that we even do have in your doctor's office is very siloed. It's really hard to extract that data out to look at it at scale across populations. But moving to the cloud, particularly in the way again that we're talking about here, you unlock that data so that, to your point, you can see it across populations, right? And you can start getting insights that can yield what we call real world insights, right? So not just what happens in a well-controlled clinical trial, but what's actually happening in the real world. And so just huge benefits for each of us as individuals, but for all of us as a society, to be able to start collecting and unlocking this data and then putting, the brilliant data scientists and scientists to, attack it.
That's really interesting. And if you think about kind of your business and this general idea, was this always the initial focus, or were there kind of pivots when you started? Could you talk a little bit about kind of maybe the early days of founding it and kind of how it's evolved?
Yeah, look, one thing I'll say is the core focus, our true north, has not changed at all. From when we started the company, we fundamentally believe that, again, we were in this transformation just like all these other industries that are going from analog to digital and in the cloud. And we wanted to be de facto infrastructure on which pharmaceutical and medical device companies build regulated software. So we've stayed true to that focus, and we've proven that out with our public customers, our folks like Novo Nordisk, Roche, Sanofi, CSL Behring, some of the world's most prominent pharmaceutical companies. We have similarly medical device companies that are not yet public. So we've been very focused on the problem we're solving, who our customer base is and how we're going about solving that. Now there's been lots of changes and pivots, underneath the, sort of that arc, if you will. Those are, I would say, kind of continuous improvement and continuous response, right, to the very real world within which we're building our technology and executing for our customers.
Excellent. And if you think about kind of like the healthcare value chain, everything from kind of like R&D as it relates to medical devices or pharmaceuticals, all the way up to kind of like the example you gave with a diabetes patient, kind of zeroing in on the right kind of levels for their treatment. Do you play across that? Are there use cases like even in like, for example, like drug development?
Yeah, I would say probably about 80% of our business, if I'm just sort of estimating off the top of my head, is for products that are already commercial products. They've been launched. Typically, they're a top 1 or 2 or 3 drug asset for our customers, so multi-billion-dollar drugs. I think if we look at the peak sales for the drugs and devices we're supporting, it adds up to something about $35 billion of sales for our customers that we're helping build digital solutions for that wrap around those products. But then about 20% of our programs are for products that are still in that R&D development stage, typically later stage phase 2 or phase 3 of development. So they're being used by patients on their way, hopefully, to successful, clinical trial outcomes and ultimately, commercialization side by side with that drug or device.
That's amazing. It's funny when you describe it, I can't help but think of like all the infinite number of kind of possibilities that BrightInsight could drive. Could you talk maybe a little about some of the challenges of growing and scaling this particular business?
Yeah, we need about 100 hours to do that. But so look, one is from you're constantly thinking about, your investment arc, right? You need to invest to, on the one hand, you think about we're supporting companies that have been typically around for decades and decades. Their product life cycle, right? A typical drug takes a decade to bring to market and then could be on market for, multiple decades in itself, right? Medical devices, they go a little bit faster, but it's still a pretty long product life cycle compared to other industries, and then they're doing more kind of tweaks and adjustments. So we have customers, that have long product life cycles. We're trying to obviously move at much faster speeds because we're doing software, but we gotta have to link all that together, right? Especially that links together at the level of the customer's product and the level of regulatory and ensuring the robustness of the software and the compliance to the system it operates in. So that, I would say, is a big part of our secret sauce and a big part of the challenge that we're continuously trying to get better at is how do you bring the speed of modern software and agility and agile software product development and marry that with these very long product life cycles and intense robust appropriately so regulatory and security requirements. So that's certainly a challenge then within that, like how do we move fast but yet have that long-term view on how we're doing things. Another key challenge is that we're creating a market here. To oversimplify, there's kind of 2 types of startups, right? There are those that are coming with the better mousetrap.
Yeah.
Then there's those that are literally creating a new market, right? And Dan Goldsmith, one of our board members, fantastic guy, he was early at Veeva, and Veeva is one of the most successful enterprise SaaS companies that sells into life sciences ever. And and the way Dan says it, look, at Veeva, people knew CRM, that they were doing their customer relationship management and had Excel spreadsheets or something else they were using, and they came and look, let us show you how to do that so much better, right? But the buyer understood the pain point, understood the value of the problem they were trying to solve, and so forth, right? He said, look, at BrightInsight, people aren't doing what we're enabling them to do yet, right? So it's not like you're saying, hey, you guys have been trying for 10 years to solve this and you've done it in a clunky way, and let us show you how to do it better. We're selling both the promise and the path at the same time, right? And that's a real challenge, right? And it's a challenge for the industry overall, but it's also a challenge for us because you don't have the same number of well understood pain points by the customer, so they may or may not believe you when you tell them here's what our experience is and others is that have tried to do it because they don't have their own often, and they don't see necessarily all the proof points on the value, right? Because it's not like we have dozens and dozens of solutions in market that you can point to that say, hey, if you do this, you're going to deliver, clearly you're going to deliver benefit for your patients and other stakeholders as well as for your business, right? So we love that challenge, but it's, there's not a straight path when you're trying to create a new market.
That makes a lot of sense. And is there a lot of customization in terms of when you're working with like a new client involved?
Yes, and it's changing over time. So we think about customization in a few different ways. So ultimately, when you're supporting, multi-billion-dollar asset, let's say drug, what's going to help that drug differentiate and win? That final product and experience needs to be very custom. It needs to be to that therapy. It needs to be to that patient type. It needs to be to the peculiarities of that drug or device. And you want to, you're not going to cut corners to give them what they need to really personalize and optimize for their specific, drug or device asset. So we always think in a very custom way from what our customers need. But from how we deliver that, our journey has been, how do you make it much, much more configurable and really reduce the amount of customization required, right? And that's really the power of software, right? If we want everybody to just rebuild everything from scratch, well, they can go hire, some software consulting shop. They wouldn't be working with BrightInsight, right?
Yeah.
The beauty of what we bring is we bring that fully compliant infrastructure. But over the last 4+ years, as we've been heavily investing money into our infrastructure, what we've done is we've both productized the platform, but then we've actually built products on top of it around very common use cases. And so if you're a drug and you say, as an example, I want to have a patient app that can help the patient, track their symptoms, monitor disease progression, get personalized adherence, have a one-stop shop for, let's say, getting education, et cetera, copay card, and so forth. Well, we look at that and say, great, we're seeing that kind of use cases over and over. So how do you get most of what you need in a configurable way instead of building that stack from scratch, right? And there's a lot of other things you need underneath that, like consent management and so forth. So we've configured all that. The drug company and the brand and the patient ultimately get something that's very custom to what they want. But so much of the building blocks, if you will, like the Legos, if you will, are pre-built that you sort of tweak it and shape to exactly what you need for your patient population, right? I think that's the art of what we're doing. And so if you think about before BrightInsight existed, it took people typically 3 to 5 years and $30 to $50 million to bring a regulated software medical device to market. Okay, We've sort of been slowly shrinking that time, where we got it down to probably 12 to 24 months and brought it down a factor of 10 on the spend. Now with our latest product launches this year, we're down to typically 6 months or so, plus or minus, to bring a first version of a regulated software medical device, let's say a disease management solution for a pharma brand to market, and reducing the cost by almost another tenth, right? So just as magnitudes of improvement in speed and cost, while frankly actually improving quality and regulatory and compliance robustness, because we've standardized, right? And when you standardize, you reduce, right, the errors, right? And you reduce the risk, and you're kind of monitoring, code at scale and so forth. So that's really the strategy of the company, if you think about it, right? Is how do we invest our R&D dollars and our experience to make the offering so much more robust, so you get that custom output, but behind the hood, if you will, in a very configurable way to really solve for speed, provide the compliant robustness, and still get that scalability.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine that there's a lot of, let's call it like IT consulting firms that would either welcome you with open arms or wish you didn't exist at the same time.
Look, you're spot on. I'll tell you where we're at in that journey and where I think it's going. So when we started the company, in our early RFPs or whatever processes, discussions we were having with clients, the rest of the decision set were exactly what you said. We're software consulting companies, because it was basically, we're going to pay somebody the money to build something on our own. And there we had data points to say, well, you can go down that path. They might tell you X, but it's going to be 3 times as long and probably 3 to 5 times the cost. And that's just, again, then you have to do the whole life cycle management, right? You have
you're just outsourcing something. Right. You're not speeding it up or making it better.
Yeah, and then you have to manage its whole life cycle. So it's not like, oh, I built it and we're done. No, it's a living software product that patients are using, and it's regulated. You got to now keep paying money to manage that whole life cycle, again, all without scale in a bespoke way. So in the beginning, that was the alternative for companies if they were doing this, was to outsource it with a systems integration partner. Now I rarely see those companies really being involved in the dialogue, but I think the future will be that, certainly it's in BrightInsight's roadmap, that ultimately those kind of folks end up partnering with us, right? Because they do bring a lot of value. They bring a tremendous amount of scale. They have relationships at every major company. They understand the businesses very well. They understand other ancillary complementary software systems that the customer is using, right? So they have a really good understanding and integration of the complex ecosystem for the pharma and medical device companies. And I think just like they have in other spaces, they'll recognize, okay, well, BrightInsight's the best-in-class partner for this capability. So how do we partner with them to, bring the value to the customer versus try to bespoke build what these guys have been doing for a number of years with a lot of investment and a lot of experience. I think we're not quite at that full partnership level with that industry, but I think we'll evolve to there as we mature and are ready to do that and in their own experiences mature.
Wow, quite a business, Cal. And I always get excited when it's not just about making a business for making a business, right? I mean, when you're driving better patient outcomes, that's super exciting, right? Pivoting a little bit here in terms of kind of like your career, we talked about IT consulting firms. You started as a consultant, I guess, right out of the gate, which a lot of our listeners are. Could you talk maybe a little bit about how your consulting experience shaped your career and also shaped the way you do business at BrightInsight?
Yeah, profoundly, it's had an impact on my career, right? I think if I hadn't, been lucky enough to get that job at BCG, out of college, I probably would be practicing emergency medicine somewhere. There's a very reasonable chance of that, right? And so again, it opened up, not just my perspective, but the ability to digest vast amounts of information very rapidly, to be able to distill what matters from what doesn't matter, to be able to, I think, articulate that back to an audience, be able to do that in a way that is clear but also inspiring to folks. That's, I think, the kinds of things that certainly I learn. I think many people learn in their consulting experience, and that is fundamental to being an entrepreneur, to being a CEO, right? Which is, all day long I'm taking in vast amounts of information from very different types of sources. I got to do it in a pretty quick way. Got to know, how to get to the right answer quickly. Got to be able to figure out, hey, where do I really need to go deep because of the magnitude of the decision and its impact or the complexity or whatever. Where can I stop, at a higher altitude of analysis before we get to the answer? So you got to do all that. But then the other thing is, and this maybe is a difference between kind of consulting and one of several differences, but one main difference between kind of consulting and quote unquote being in the real world is the communication doesn't stop with the PowerPoint slide. In fact, it just starts with that, right? And for us to effectively communicate and lead, our own companies, the investor community, obviously our customers, et cetera, right? It goes way beyond slides. And in fact, slides can sometimes be limiting and kind of take away from what you're really trying to do, right? But don't get me wrong, it still gives you that clarity of how to be clear in your thinking and what you communicate. It's just the medium is not necessarily slide driven.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And then you're also someone that started in consulting and then spent a decent amount of time in, I'll use air quotes, but in industry, right? And I guess curious to hear kind of your thoughts on what perspective that gave you just as it relates to your career overall.
So a few things. So one is when you get to industry, you realize the delta between the right answer and the right answer successfully implemented. And so much of your energy actually goes into that part of it, right? And so getting to the right answer is honestly a very small part of working in industry. You're not spending that much time figuring out what you should do. You spend the majority of your time trying to actually navigate your organization or your customers or competitors, whatever it is, to actually bring it to fruition. And I know management consulting has changed since I left a couple of decades ago, but that, at least from when I was there, that's a big difference. And oftentimes I think for consultants to really bring that empathy is important, because I remember, frankly, just looking at my own self and not pointing fingers anywhere else. As a consultant, you can be like, I can't believe these folks are taking so long to do this, or they don't understand it, or they don't get it, or they're, it's like only when you're in their shoes do you appreciate that, right? And when I was in industry, to your point, I worked with everybody along the years, right? Like every big consulting firm I ended up working with, and they did great work, but that's where the focus went. It's like, great, you gave me the right answer. Now I'm past that. I'm focusing on the implementation. The other thing I'll say, and hopefully this is valuable to some of your folks that are still in industry, is nobody's listening to you after the 10th slide. I don't know why I ever bothered doing a single slide ever in my career beyond the 10, right? I remember burning the midnight oil working on slides that were in the appendices. No executive is listening to that. If you don't have a clear answer and clearly articulated and convinced us of what that answer is by that, frankly, it's a rare client that's going past that, because it's just not how the real world works. Again, because it's A, you're relying that you've done the analysis, but B, you either get it or you don't, you believe it or you don't, right? And so don't spend the time on that. And if I had to do it over again, I would spend less time on, like I said, writing all those slides and doing sort of non-value added analyses. I would have spent more cutting myself off on that and instead focusing on, okay, what's the situation my customer's in? They don't just need the right answer, but who are they trying to convince? What are they going to do with this answer? Let me just think about it. If I convince Ken the right answer is X, what's Ken going to have to do when he gets out of the room to be successful? Spend more time really thinking through that and bringing that empathy and perspective and advice to the room. And the perfect meetings are you get done with the right answer in the first 15, 20 minutes, and the rest of the time you're talking about, okay, Ken, we've been thinking about this, and that, and this is what I imagine you're going to have to navigate to now successfully go implement this or take the next step with it, right? And so spend time on that. How do you actually articulate the message with words, not slides? And then how do you help them actually successfully operationalize it versus just, keep convincing them that you have the right answer and you're the smartest person in the room. So that was, for me, when I learned kind of being on the other side of it in industry.
Yeah, and I love that point, especially about thinking about it from their perspective and kind of tying it back to being a tech CEO now, right? The very best product managers spend so much time with the customers, listening to the customers, right? Like it's not just about the technical attributes. It's about hearing what they have to say and their pain points and everything like that. And I think that's a really, really good point.
Yeah, same thing in healthcare. I was talking to somebody at a big pharma company this week, and we were just comparing notes on different things. And he was just saying, like, look, let's say take an oncology patient, for example, right? Even they have cancer, obviously a super stressful situation for anybody, any family. And it's very easy for the drug company to just think about the molecule, the mechanism of action, how the science is going to work, and do the whole product development around that. When, if you talk to patients, many times for many cancers, the thing they care about most is quality of life, right? Or other things they may care about, right? Can I still be up and about and see my grandkids? Can I go do that trip I wanted to do before, right?
Can I eat?
Can I eat? Exactly. Can I sleep without pain, right? And a lot of these things, to your point, are often lost on people who are in all industries, right? And so I think the folks who do the best product development, like you said, are actually immersed in their customers and not in within their own companies. They're their own companies they're change agents for, but their insights and stuff is coming through, really being deeply empathetic to the people whose lives they're trying to improve.
That's a really good insight. And I guess it kind of leads me to my next question, which is like a lot of former consultants and current consultants kind of like sitting out there thinking about their career, kind of like, okay, what should I do next? Any general advice? I know we talked about think about it from other people's perspective, but any other kind of general advice, Cal?
Give a few pieces for what it's worth. Definitely don't sit in a position of saying these are truths. They're just truths for me. So obviously, by definition, almost most consultants are, type A personalities and have a bias to overanalyze and plan for way too long. There's no way I could have planned where my career has gone, right? And I couldn't have imagined to be any more fulfilling and, zero regrets, right? And so don't overanalyze to be like, hey, I want to be X in 18 years and here's every step I need to take to get there, right? Because then you're going to, I think it has a lot of downsides personally to doing that. So one is you're going to be so focused on the destination is you're not going to enjoy and take in the journey. And obviously, to be clear, I think the journey is 90% of it, and the destination is 10 or whatever you want to think about it, but it's certainly not 100% the destination, right? Number two, you then will, cut yourself off from so many other potential paths that could have been way more fulfilling, way more, exciting, way more lucrative, way more impactful, whatever it is, who knows, right? But you gotta, not have that tunnel vision. And, so that's one piece. Don't overplan, don't over-engineer. In the very near term, I would say focus on where do you want to, it's generic, but like, what are you truly going to be excited to go do? Life is just too short to say, I'm going to go do that role, even though I'm not really excited about doing it, And frankly, I would say the same thing even on the projects you're getting assigned to. Push back on stuff. I mean, listen to being like, okay, and be open-minded on what you might get out of a particular assignment. But if you're like, there's nothing that you're excited about doing that, push hard against it. Like, why spend the next 3 to 6 months being miserable working, on a project or a team or a client or a topic or whatever that you have no interest in, right? And so again, you got to be pragmatic, but I see people way too often kind of always take it for the team and be way too much kind of long-term oriented and way too much, kind of this is what I should do versus what I want to do. Again, I say this speaking to consultants, not the average person, yeah. Right? With the biases of, generalizing, and stereotyping consultants.
Specifically insecure overachievers.
Exactly.
Take note.
And be confident, right? To your other point around that what you just said, like, be confident. By definition, you actually are very talented and, take some risks.
I love that first point too, just on like okay, yeah, it seems a little bit trite. Oh, it's the journey, not the destination. But actually, like when you when you look at the science of it, it's actually true. I listened to there's a guy, Andrew Huberman. I'm sure you've heard of him. He does like a podcast and like he talks all about motivation, right? And like I personally try to manage my energy, not like my work life. And so like I'm always thinking about, okay, how do I manage that? And like there's all sorts of tools that you can use, but like it turns out, yeah, it really is the journey, right?
100%. Yeah.
I guess, Cal, speaking of journey, any final kind of closing thoughts just in terms of kind of like where you see Bright Insights going and where you guys are headed?
Yeah, look, our vision and mission is what you alluded to, really oriented around leveraging digital to improve clinical outcomes across the globe, across diseases across the globe at scale. And the way we're going to do that is by becoming that de facto platform on top of which pharma and medical device companies digitize their products, right? And if we do that, then as the industry digitizes, we'll be the enabler to do that. And so we're very focused on that, and that was our focus from day one, right? And so we're very much, how do we continue to invest in the technology, keep improving, its robustness, its capabilities, its global scale. We're, 64 countries and expanding today. How do we keep bringing in the best companies to support them and expand within their portfolios? So it may sound a little bit of more of the same, but we're really, in the first inning of this transformation for pharma and medtech, and, excited to be, enablers for them to really, be more successful at going down that path. So we'll continue to do that, and, we'll obviously continue to scale in terms of, people, but importantly in terms of impact. And what I'm most excited about, if I pull back to the next 12 to 24 months, is up till now we celebrate a lot of milestones and oftentimes announcing a new customer logo, right? Because we've run on Sanofi, however many $100 billion company, and that is a huge achievement. And the programs we're doing for them, but I'm looking forward to where it's logos will still be important, but we're more measuring ourselves in terms of how many different drugs or therapy disease areas are patients using solutions operating the digital on Bright Insights platform, right? How many countries, how many patients themselves, right? And right now I think, we're up to 20 some countries with patients using our products and the tens of thousands, et cetera, from a patient's perspective. But I think we're hitting this point of inflection where in 12 to 24 months, we really start scaling those numbers as more and more of our customer solutions come to market and start scaling. And that'll be exciting, right? To just, again, talk more about the end patient and the impact we're having there versus our direct customers who we're partnered with today to get to that point.
Well, that's awesome. And you guys have a lot to be proud about. Cal, if our listeners were interested in learning more about Bright Insight or yourself or what you're doing, any kind of like suggested links or anything like that we can drop in the description?
Sure, yeah. Obviously, go to our website, brightinsight.com. So just as it reads, there's no S on it, so just brightinsight.com. If there's good reason to want to ping me directly, I'm fine with that as well. Kal.Patel@brightinsight.com. So it's Kal.Patel@brightinsight.com.
Awesome. Well, Cal, thanks so much. I feel like I learned a lot today. I'm sure our listeners did as well. Appreciate you spending time with us. And for those of you listening for the first time, make sure to subscribe on Apple, Amazon, or Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe or notification bell as well. And if you're interested in getting in touch with me or anybody else at ECA Partners, it's going to be eca-partners.com. Cal, thanks so much. And for everybody else, talk to you next week.